Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Heil Jesu Christ, du höchstes Gut. Höchstes, sorry. That translates to Lord Jesus Christ, you highest good. We looked at this particular cantata and another version of this particular text yesterday, but this is an actual chorale, like it's just for voices, and it might have some instrumental accompaniment, but there are no interludes, so we're just going to hop right into the analysis. I think there are some interesting points in which I want to talk about as we get to the points of modulation. So 2 sharps in the key signature, we start on B minor, we end on B major. I reckon we're in the key of B minor, and we have a passing tone in the bass before we get G, C sharp, E, and B. And I think there are 2 ways we can analyze this. We could analyze this as a C sharp minor 7 flat 5 and second inversion, or we could look at this C sharp as an accented non-chord tone, and we could analyze this as E minor over B, which would be a 4-6 chord. And I think there's no one right analysis. They're both accurate. You can just pick one or the other. They're both achieving the same goal. Then we have F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A sharp. That is F sharp major, which is our dominant, passing 7th in the bass before we get D, D, F sharp, and B, which is our tonic triad and first inversion. Then we have an interesting melodic minor ascending here. If we look at the downbeat, we have C sharp, E, G sharp, and C sharp, which is C sharp minor. We might be tempted to call that 2 without the diminished symbol, but I think it's more likely that this is actually A sharp diminished over C sharp, which is 7-6. It completes this chord progression that we see, 1-6-7-6 going to 1 B minor, B, F sharp, B, and D. 1-6-7-6-1, or the reverse, is a pretty common chord progression. We then have F sharp, A, and C, which is our 5 chord. It's another F sharp major chord, delayed passing 7th in the tenor before our perfect authentic cadence occurs, with B minor, B, D, F sharp, and B. Now I'm going to analyze this, actually maybe it's not the best way to analyze this as a direct modulation, but it sounds like we're moving to the key of A here, if anything, just briefly, but what ends up happening here is we have B minor or G sharp diminished over B, and I think what's happening here is that we are modulating to the key of A major briefly, and we could be doing so via a 2 chord. I think that we could call either of these B minors a 2 chord, but I think this F sharp here is actually an accented non-chord tone, and this G sharp diminished is our leading tone chord in first inversion in the key of A. That's just what it sounds like to me, and the fact that A major happens afterwards is telling for the rest of the phrase. We're going to see a similar idea happen later, but it's going to be contextualized in F sharp minor, which is similar to the chorale we saw a few episodes ago. But here we're going to the key of A major, 7-6 to 1. We have a passing 7th in the bass. We have F sharp, A, and C sharp, which is F sharp minor. That is our submediant, passing tone in the bass, passing tone in the alto before we get D, D, F sharp, and F sharp, which is D major in root position, or actually, depending on how we look at it, I think this is actually where we start to modulate to the key of B minor, because immediately afterwards we get ascending melodic minor scale, or I guess we could even include this F sharp into it, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, and B. So this might be a 4 chord here. I reckon that this C is also a passing 7th, but still, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is where we modulate back to the key of B, and this D is now our 3 chord, and then here we have D, B, G sharp, and E, which is E7 over D. That is 4-4-2, not 5 of 7, as we might be thinking. We could even say that maybe we're still in the key of A major up until this point, because this would just be 5 in the key of E major anyways. But I think this is part of a melodic minor passage, the G sharp included, so I think the modulation happens a bit earlier, and we're just getting a bout of ascending, or we're just getting a bout of melodic minor harmonization. In this case we get C sharp, A sharp, and E, which is A sharp diminished over C sharp, which is 7-6, 3, 4, 2, 7, 6. That's a pretty straightforward progression. 3 goes to 4 with some regularity, and we would expect this to go to 1, B, D, B, and D, which is a relatively uncommon spelling. We do see the double third, double root spelling of a tonic, or just a triad in general, from time to time, but it's probably the least common configuration that we'll see. We have passing tones in the lower voices. Then we have D, F sharp, B, and D, which is our tonic triad in first inversion. And interestingly, we end the A section with a half cadence, F sharp, A sharp, and C, which is our 5 chord. Now, this modulation here, the reason why I say that this B minor triad is not a common chord between B minor and A, even though it is it just feels to me like when I'm listening that we are going directly from the key of B minor to A. It does not sound like the chords are eliding. It doesn't sound like this is a 2-7 progression in the key of A, even though it could be analyzed that way. So what I guess you could do in parentheses is just say A here, 2, going to 7-6. I think that is an alternative analysis that does work, but I think it just sounds more direct to me, and it's interesting that the direct modulation is occurring with the B minor there, but take it with a grain of salt. I don't think that I think that both analyses are correct. It's just one demonstrates that there's a relationship between the two keys via a common chord. This just feels like a new idea to me, and sometimes the idea feels separate, like it does in this case for me. Sometimes the ideas feel connected, and this idea, or at least in terms of its harmonic content, feels like a new adventure rather than a continuation of the previous phrase, and an elision, a harmonic elision occurring. But regardless, we're going to go into the next phrase, which ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor. So we start off with a B minor chord, we start off with a D major chord, D, A, and F sharp, with a passing tone in the tenor. So we have a 3 chord here. Then we have A, C sharp, A, and E, which is our 7 chord in root position, passing 7th in the alto, before we get B, D, F sharp, and B, which is our tonic triad in root position. Kind of like a modal progression here. We're not seeing any leading tone yet. We get the melodic minor happening after this tonic triad, and we have some passing tones here. And these passing tones actually spell an E7 chord in second inversion. So we have 4-4-3 happening here, and I think that that's significant because 4 wants to go to 5, F sharp, A sharp, and C, which is our 5 chord in root position. And we get some passing tones as well that coincidentally spell a B minor triad in second inversion in passing, but I don't think that's as significant to the chord progression. 1-6-4 chords like in the middle of the progression are incidental, I would say. They usually are reserved for cadential situations. Afterwards we get E, G, C sharp, and E, which is C sharp diminished over E. That would be a 2-6 chord, so a bit of, what's the word? Oh my goodness, I use this word all the time. Transitive. It's a transitive progression where 2 typically wants to go to 5, but here we have 5 going to 2, and we do see that sometimes. We also have a passing tone in the bass. That takes us to G, G, B, and D, which is G major in root position. Again, another transitive progression. 5-2-6 is against the grain of the cycle of falling fifths, which tends to outline the normative chord progressions that we would expect in tonal music. But we see that Bach goes either direction. I wouldn't say equally, but frequently enough for it to not be like a super interesting point. It's more interesting in the grand scheme of things when compared to other music, but as someone who's sort of specializing in Bach at this point in time, it's just interesting to compare to what the normal tonal hindsight look back on the music is, and it's the other direction rather than going up. So here we have 1, 5, 2, 6, or I guess if you include this 4 chord here, but if you don't include the 4 chord, but bare minimum we have the 1, 2, 6, and then we have an escape tone, or I guess it would technically be an appoggiatura, the opposite of an escape tone, or the flip around. And then we have F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, F sharp, C sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. That is our 5 chord. See how going against the grain actually takes us to a predominant chord. And then we have this 7th here that then turns into B minor in the next chord. The 7th doesn't turn into that. The 7th resolves down by step to the 3rd of B minor, B, D, F sharp, and B, which is our tonic triad in root position. Then we get an interesting comparison to the second phrase. That is, we're actually seeing some similarities between how the first section worked and the second section is working as well, where we have a perfect authentic cadence followed by a half cadence. Perfect authentic cadence followed not by a half cadence, but a cadence in the key of the subtonic A major. But we don't go to A major until we visit the key of F sharp minor, and we end in an imperfect authentic cadence. So I think we directly go to the key of F sharp here. And the reason why I think we go to the key of F sharp is, even though we could equivocate this B minor chord, and I'll put this in parenthetical parentheses here, we could call this a 1 chord going to a 4 chord, which then goes to 2 diminished in first inversion. I think it's actually more likely that we just call this its own idea in the key of F sharp minor, just to mirror the idea of what's happening in the second phrase, where I said that we had like a direct modulation, even though we're dealing with another key that has B minor in common with it. It's just the way that I hear it. I just hear them as separate ideas, and that G sharp going to something that isn't a leading tone feels more significant to me. So I feel like it's playing a role, and when it's playing a role beyond just it being a diatonic chord. It feels like it's tonicizing something. So you could call this 7/6 of this F sharp also being an accented chord tone, non-chord tone, sorry. We could call this 7/6 of 3, but I'm just going to call it 2/6 going to A, E, A, and C sharp, which is our 3 chord. So they're basically the same thing, 2 going to 3, and just some adjacent harmony here, in the sense that the numbers are adjacent to one another. And sorry that this analysis is so scrunched. There are just different ways that you could go about analyzing this 7/6 of 3, 2/6, 4, in the key of this being a 4 chord, a common chord in between the key of B minor and F sharp minor. It's entirely up to you, and I think all these analyses articulate the same point, so that's why I'm going to present them. I don't think there's one right answer. But then we have D sharp, F sharp, A natural, and B, which is B7 over D sharp. That's another 4/6/5 chord, or another major 4 chord. We've seen 4/2, 4/4/2, 4/4/3, and now 4/6/5. And we're seeing another passing chord that complements or logically follows 4. We have E sharp, G sharp, G sharp, and B sharp, which is E sharp diminished in root position. That is our 7 chord in the key of F sharp minor. And then we have F sharp minor, which is our tonic triad, F sharp, A, F sharp, and A. Then we have a couple of passing tones here. We have B, or neighbor tones, and 1 passing tone in the melody, and 2 neighbor tones, which is like another, here we have some cross relations actually. We have the E sharp against the E natural here. So this would be like a subtonic 7th going from one F sharp to another F sharp, A, F sharp, and F sharp, with some passing tones in the tenor and the melody. And then we get a third F sharp, F sharp, F sharp, C sharp, and A, which is our tonic triad again. And this is where we modulate to the key of A. Right here is where it starts to feel like it for me, right before the naturalization of the melodic minor. This feels like 6/5/4/5/1 in the key of A major. And we're going to call this 6. The same way that 6 was our predominant chord in the key of B minor here. Passing 7th, passing 7th in the bass, apologies, passing tone in the melody. We get D, F sharp, and B, which is B minor over D, which is 2-6. We know that Bach loves 2-6 chords, even more specifically 2-6-5 chords, but we see them both. And then we have E, G sharp, E, and B, which is this very brief 5 chord, which makes this an imperfect authentic cadence before we cadence on A major, A, E, and C sharp. And this chromaticism in the bass here is suggesting to me that even though we could say that this was 7 in the key of B minor, I'm just going to continue the idea of this being a direct modulation to the key of B minor. This feels like a separate idea to me, and I have been meditating about this a lot. I have been analyzing a lot of the chorales with common chord modulations, and I think it's really just an outlook. Sometimes it feels more like a common chord modulation to me, even though it's at the end of a phrase and going into a new one. But this chorale in particular didn't feel like there was a blending of phrases. They all felt like their own ideas. Even though there are ways to analyze via common chord, it's not the only vehicle that Bach has used. Sometimes we see much more deliberate direct modulations where it really feels like a stark contrast. But here, I think it's a little bit more nuanced. I'm sticking with the direct modulation approach to this chorale harmonization in general, but I think that there are ways for you to also make the argument for the common chord modulation. And I think that that's the most important part, is being able to articulate and back up, articulate your stance and back it up why it would be the case that your approach is logical. And I think that there are multiple outlooks, and that's what's honestly really beautiful about analysis, is that there is no definitive answer in a lot of these cases. So yes, we have F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, and C sharp. This is a 5 chord in the key of B minor, more specifically 5-6. It's F sharp major. And that goes to B minor, B, B, F sharp, and D, which is our tonic triad in root position. This B is a chord tone, this F sharp is a chord tone, and then we get C sharp, E, A, and E. Notice how we have this sort of crossroad. It's not super close, but we are getting it in enough proximity for us to hear it differently here. This is A major in first inversion. That's A major over C, and that takes us to B minor in first inversion. D, B, F sharp, and F sharp, which is 1-6, 1-7-6, 1-6, 1-6, 7-6, 1. We see this configuration here very commonly. We see the diminished version of the 7 chord, the leading tone chord. This might be the first time I've seen it with a subtonic chord, but the fact that we are seeing 1-7-1 is telling of the fact that this chord progression is a staple of Bach's harmonic writing in the chorales, and I think it's really fascinating to see it with the subtonic 7th. I had to look here to see if I was making a mistake, but no, this is an A natural, and it makes sense because the G afterwards is natural. This is just a descending minor scale in the key of B. Regardless, we go to E, B, G sharp, and F, this F being a suspension, but we know that 4 majors being implied here. And then we have a passing chord where all the voices are moving, and if you've watched my videos in the past, you know that when you see all the voices moving, there's typically a chord to be analyzed, and here we have F sharp, C sharp, A natural, and E. This is a very interesting point. I had to check here to see if there was a typo as well. We have G sharp, A natural, and B, and I had to confer with 3 different versions, and this is an agreement with all of them. So this is just B Dorian going on here, where we have the raised 6th and the minor 7th from like right here, which is really interesting. It's a little fragment of B Dorian going on. So that's where we get the major 4 and the minor 5-7. And it's happening not in a cadential context, which means the 5 is sort of up for grabs. You know, the vast majority of 5 chords in minor keys are going to be major, but you're going to encounter the minor 5 at some point, and there's really no refuting it. It's a totally fine chord in tonality. It just functions as, a staple chord in the middle of a progression rather than a cadential function. That dates back even to the Renaissance. Even in the Renaissance, they had the leading tone figured out in cadential situations, so this isn't like new tech or anything like that. But this 5 chord goes to G major, G, B, B, and D, which is our 6 chord, so some adjacent harmony and also a deceptive progression, adjacent being 4, 5, 6, so the numbers are in order, and deceptive because we have 5 going to 6. We would expect 5 to go to 1. Minor 5, not so much. It doesn't have that same burden, but still enough. I would still expect it to go to 1 in some capacity. We have some passing tones in the alto and the bass as well, before we go to E, C sharp, G, and E, which is C sharp diminished over E. It's a 2-6 chord. Bach loves those. It's interesting that we haven't seen any 2-6-5 chords, and we've only seen 2-6 chords in this particular chorale, whether they are in a cadential situation or at the beginning of the progression, who knows, but it seems to be some intention there. Then we get F sharp, F sharp, A sharp, F sharp and C sharp. That is our 5 chord in root position. This C sharp is a chord tone, and then on this beat here we get F sharp and E natural happening at the same time, which turns it into F sharp 7, and then our perfect authentic cadence at the end of this chorale takes us to our tonic major chord. We've seen a couple of endings that have been ambiguous the last couple of chorales, whether they've been a minor chorale that's ended with a minor chord or a chorale that's ended with an open fifth. Definitely some anomalies for cadences at the end of the chorale, but here we have our typical major tonic triad at the end of a minor chorale. Bach does that a lot with his minor chorales. And that is my analysis for today. Yeah, as far as my approach to the modulations are concerned, sometimes they're common chord, sometimes they're not. And for me, it seemed to be consistent across pretty much all of the phrases, where there was like a direct modulation from one to the next while you're in the section, right? We didn't have it at the beginning of this section here, but every phrase afterwards felt like there was a new key at the beginning of the next phrase and a common chord modulation throughout. That is until we got to the last phrase, which stayed in B minor throughout. But I think it's an interesting formal consideration, and the fact that I heard the whole chorale that way, I think does strengthen that argument. But if you think no, Forrest, I think that 2 going to 7 is a totally usual progression, and this should have been analyzed like a common chord progression. That's totally fine. Maybe tell me in the comment section if you have that sentiment. Regardless, I think it articulates the point. I think that whatever viewpoint you have on how the modulations work in this particular chorale harmonization is totally right, so long as you could back it up with some discussion. But that's going to be the end of my analysis for today. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel. If you'd like to go along with me on this journey to analyze all of the chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe and hit the notification icon. I upload once a day, so if you want your daily fix or your daily dose of analysis or Bach, feel free to join me on this adventure. Okay, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.